For 50 long years, the galaxy had known a kind of peace that felt almost impossible to many of its older citizens. The Galactic Council, formed after centuries of chaos, had managed to keep hundreds of species in line with laws, treaties, and delicate diplomacy. At the center of it all stood the consuls, an ancient, telepathic race known for their intelligence, patience, and influence. No decision passed in the council without their quiet nod. And among the newer races admitted into the council, the humans had surprised everyone. Not through superior firepower or aggressive expansion, but through calm reasoning, brilliant negotiation, and a single man who represented Earth's voice across the stars, Ambassador Elias Vance. He was not a warrior. He didn't command fleets or carry weapons. But his words had defused wars before they began, turned enemies into allies, and built bridges between the most unlikely species. Elias had become a symbol of hope, not only for humans, but for others who believed that peace was not weakness. On the council world of Virex Prime, the Grand Hall buzzed with quiet voices and shifting tension as the annual Summit of Order began. Tall pillars of glowing crystal lined the chamber, and species from every corner of the galaxy filled their seats. In the center stood the representatives of the 5 major powers, one of them being the consuls, tall and featureless with smooth silver skin and emotionless voices. Across from them sat Elias Vance, calm as ever in his dark diplomatic robes, eyes focused, hands resting lightly on the marble table. This summit was supposed to be simple, a reaffirmation of peace, trade routes, and mutual agreement. But something in the air felt wrong. The consuls were unusually cold, even by their standards. Their leader, Councillor Tyrex, didn't offer the traditional greeting. Instead, he stood and raised his long fingers to silence the room. The words that came next shattered the air like a thunderclap. "We, the consul, hereby withdraw our support for the human delegation. The species of Earth has violated the sacred accord by harboring rebel elements and interfering with lawful consual territory. Effective immediately, all treaties with humanity are void." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Elias didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed. The accusation was not just sudden, it was baseless. Earth had done no such thing. Elias stood slowly, his voice low but clear, cutting through the rising noise. "These claims are false. If there are accusations, we request a formal investigation, not a political ambush." But Tyrex ignored the response. With a flick of his hand, a holomap filled the air, glowing red across multiple systems. "These colonies under human control have refused our inspectors. This is evidence of defiance. We will act accordingly." Elias looked at the map, recognizing many of the highlighted world's peaceful colonies with no military presence, known for farming, trade, and cultural exchange. Blocking them off would crush their economy and isolate millions of human and alien citizens alike. Silence fell as the other delegations looked back and forth, unsure of what to say. The council had never seen such a bold and immediate attack on a member world. Elias could feel the weight of every eye in the room, some curious, some afraid, some already stepping back from Earth in their minds. But he didn't break. He looked straight into Tyrex's empty eyes and said just one sentence. "You just made a mistake you won't forget." There was no anger in his voice. Just a quiet storm, calm before change, the consul didn't yet understand. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the chamber, cloak trailing behind him. The galaxy had changed in that moment, and Elias Vance knew there would be no going back. Back aboard the Earth delegation cruiser, Elias sat in silence, staring out at the stars beyond the window. His aides rushed around him, trying to contact Earth, to gather details, to confirm if any colonies had reported trouble. Elias spoke little. He was thinking, watching, feeling the shift in galactic winds. The consul didn't act without reason. They planned moves like a game of star chess, and this was no sudden burst of emotion. It was part of something bigger, something darker. For the consul to declare Earth an enemy meant they believed they could do so without consequence. That the other species wouldn't defend humanity, that Earth would back down. But Elias Vance had seen enough across the stars to know one thing: humans might speak softly, but if pushed into a corner, they would fight back in ways no one expected. He wasn't a soldier, but he had just been given a different kind of battlefield, and he wasn't planning to lose. The communication line to Earth finally opened. The president appeared on the screen, her face tense, worried. Elias gave her a full report in precise words, calm and clear. "I request emergency authority," he finished. "We need flexibility. This is not a war of weapons. This is a war of truth, influence, and shadows. Let me fight it." There was a long pause. Then the president gave a slow nod. "You are authorized as a diplomatic executor, Elias. Do what must be done." As the signal ended, Elias leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes for a moment. Around him, the stars still burned, quiet and distant, as if nothing had changed. But he knew better. Peace had been shattered, not with lasers or missiles, but with lies and arrogance. The consual believed they had broken humanity's place in the galaxy. What they didn't know yet was that Elias Vance had just begun a different kind of war, and this war wouldn't be fought with fleets, but with fury, silence, and the unbreakable will of a diplomat who knew how to win without firing a single shot. The moment Elias Vance received executive authority from Earth, the stars no longer felt silent. They seemed to whisper secrets, now hints of danger hiding in the corners of space, warnings of something worse than open war. The consual hadn't just challenged humanity's place in the Galactic Council, they had struck at the soul of what humanity stood for. And while the galaxy believed that humans were soft diplomats, lovers of peace, and followers of rules, Elias knew something else entirely behind the calm voice of every envoy, behind every handshake and signed treaty. There was fury, quiet and controlled, waiting to rise when justice was broken. That fury didn't come with shouting or wild threats. It moved like fire under ice, silent, focused, and deadly when released. Elias sat in the war room of the Earth delegation ship, but there were no weapons here, only data streams, political records, colony reports, and private communications between council members. He had a small team of loyal analysts, translators, and security officers who didn't wear uniforms, but who served the flag with a different kind of strength. They all waited as Elias stood in the center of the room and finally spoke. "The consual don't want war. Not the kind we're used to. They want isolation, to silence us, not destroy us. They think if they cut our ties, we'll fall alone." He turned toward the display, highlighting each red-marked colony the consual had accused of rebellion. "We're not going to fight back with ships. Not yet. We're going to expose the lie." At first, his plan didn't make sense to everyone. Some wanted immediate retaliation. Others feared losing more ground. But Elias had already seen too many wars start with pride and end with regret. This time, he needed proof, something undeniable. He began by reaching out to every colony marked as hostile. The messages were encoded, secret. His instructions were clear: gather records, transmit logs, find witnesses. And if something felt wrong in their systems, unusual ships, secret visits, missing supplies, they were to report it all. What came back chilled him more than he expected. One by one, the colonies reported strange incidents. Small consual vessels entering orbit without announcement. Trade convoys being rerouted or lost near their sectors. In some cases, communication beacons had gone dark for hours without explanation. Then came the most disturbing detail: a cargo inspector on a mining world had found consual signal devices buried under one of their own communication towers. Someone had planted false transmissions, meant to make the colony appear as if it were rejecting council protocols. The setup had been quiet, subtle, and designed to avoid detection. But it was there. A deliberate lie. Elias gathered all the evidence, arranging it like pieces of a puzzle. And the picture became clear. The consual weren't responding to rebellion, they were creating the illusion of one. But why? That question burned in his mind as he stared out at the glowing stars, trying to understand. The consual were powerful, yes, but they had always played the long game. They didn't fear humanity's military strength. What they feared was its influence. Over the years, more and more species had started siding with humans in council votes. They supported human-led peacekeeping programs, human mediation, even human cultural exports. Slowly, the galaxy was turning to Earth not just for balance, but for leadership. And that, Elias realized, was the threat. The consul had ruled the council not with fear, but with mystery and quiet control. Humanity had disrupted that balance without even meaning to. Elias knew now that the attack wasn't about rebellion. It was about control. The consul wanted to remind the galaxy who held the reins. They had chosen to frame humanity because they believed humans would hesitate, that no one would believe the truth. Elias wasn't going to let that happen. He activated secure lines and reached out to every ambassador he could still trust, those who had seen what humanity had done for their people, who remembered the peace Elias had fought to protect. One by one, he presented them with the evidence: false signals, planted data, tampered logs. At first, some were afraid to speak. The consul were still powerful. But as the truth spread quietly across diplomatic channels, the tide began to shift. Meanwhile, Elias prepared for something bolder. He scheduled a private summit on a neutral station far from the council's official reach. He invited ambassadors from 20 species, including 3 who had once fought against humanity. And when they arrived, Elias didn't begin with speeches. He showed them the evidence. Every report, every manipulation, every proof that the consul had betrayed the very peace they claimed to protect. The room fell silent. And then, slowly, voices rose not in anger, but in agreement. They had seen signs too. Rumors, patterns, whispers. Elias hadn't just shown them a crime, he had uncovered the first crack in the consul's ancient mask. After that, everything moved quickly. A network of quiet resistance began to form, not with weapons, but with information. Ambassadors spoke behind closed doors. Trade leaders delayed shipments to consual territories. Small alliances started reforming in secret. All of it pointed to one growing truth: humanity would not be isolated. They would not fall alone. And Elias, though still a diplomat, was now the center of something far greater than a single species defense. He was becoming the voice of a new movement, one that demanded honesty, justice, and a future where no species, no matter how ancient, could rule through fear and deception. Back aboard the delegation ship, one of Elias's aides rushed into the room. "Sir, consual ships are approaching Colony Zone 7B. They're using inspection orders, but there's no authorization from the council." Elias didn't hesitate. "Send a drone. Broadcast the encounter in full. Let the galaxy see it live." The aide blinked. "That could cause chaos." Elias looked him in the eyes. "No. It will cause clarity." As the drone launched, the stars around it shimmered quietly, unaware of the storm building behind every whisper, every message, every signal sent through the diplomatic shadows. The fury behind the flag had been awakened not with rage, but with purpose. Elias Vance didn't need a fleet to fight this war. He only needed the truth and the courage to speak it where others stayed silent. And far beyond, in the silent halls of the consual high chamber, ancient minds began to feel something they hadn't felt in 1,000 years: uncertainty. The stars had seen wars before, bloody, loud, and full of destruction, but what humanity unleashed now was something different. It wasn't fleets moving through space with weapons raised, nor was it armies marching into fire. This was a quiet kind of war, one where no shots were fired, and yet damage was felt deeper than explosions. Elias Vance, once seen only as a diplomat, now moved through the galaxy like a storm wrapped in silence. The consul had shattered peace, hoping to make humanity desperate, to force them into rash action that would justify their lies. But what the consul had failed to understand was that humans didn't always need to fight with weapons. Sometimes they could fight with ideas, truth, and the unity of those they had helped. From the bridge of his command vessel, still a diplomatic ship, still unarmed, Elias watched as the data came in. Dozens of systems had begun refusing trade with the consul, not through violence, but by tightening rules, questioning inspections, or rerouting cargo. Small actions, each seemingly harmless, but together they slowed the consual machine like sand poured into an engine. Meanwhile, human specialists, skilled in diplomacy, psychology, and communication were dispatched across the stars. They didn't wear armor, but carried words sharp enough to cut through layers of lies. In marketplaces and council halls, they whispered truths and asked the right questions. Why are colonies being silenced without trial? Why are peacekeepers avoiding evidence? Why are only human systems being punished? These questions, asked softly and repeatedly, began to echo in the minds of those who had once stayed quiet. Back on Earth, the United Human Coalition activated its greatest weapon: information. Through encrypted galactic networks, they broadcasted files gathered from colonies, interviews with victims, and footage from drone scouts. None of it was forced. All of it was real. The consual, once seen as wise and above corruption, began to look like tyrants pretending to keep peace. Other species started remembering how often humans had helped them, how Earth had sent medicine to a dying world, or how human engineers had rebuilt water systems after ancient machines collapsed. These memories returned not through grand speeches, but through simple facts. And slowly, support for the consul started to slip. Even neutral races now looked at them with doubt. Elias didn't smile at this shift. He knew it wasn't enough. The consul would soon realize that something bigger was happening, and they would not sit quietly. The next move had to be more precise, more daring, but still without a single weapon fired. So he focused on Virex Prime, a shadow planet that no map officially listed but which everyone in high politics had heard of. It was where the consul moved resources without question, where meetings happened that never made it into records. Elias had suspected it for weeks. Now he had confirmation. A former consual worker, terrified and alone, had come forward. She claimed the rebellion charges against human colonies were based on doctored data, all filtered through a secret relay hidden near Virex Prime. If Elias could prove that, the consul's credibility would be crushed before the entire galaxy. He didn't send a fleet. He sent a single covert drone equipped with deep-range surveillance tools and a transmitter locked on a frequency known only to a handful of allies. The drone entered orbit under the disguise of debris, unnoticed by consual patrols. It recorded encrypted messages bouncing from the surface to the council's secure lines. Some of the messages matched ones used in the original accusations. Elias now had the missing link, the trail from consual manipulation straight to the council floor. But he didn't rush to release it. He sent copies to trusted ambassadors first, making sure the truth would survive even if his own voice was silenced. Meanwhile, on Virex Prime, consual agents discovered the drone and destroyed it, thinking they had stopped the leak. But the data had already spread. Elias now stood before the council, unarmed, unprotected, and more dangerous than ever. With every word, he laid out the facts not to accuse, but to reveal. "We are not here to start war," he said, his voice calm but steady. "We are here because someone already did. And they used peace as their disguise." As he spoke, the live feed played the intercepted messages, the proof of planted evidence, the betrayal hidden under official orders. Around him, ambassadors watched with growing horror not just at the consul, but at themselves, for how easily they had accepted the lies. The consual delegation denied everything, of course. They accused Elias of manipulation, of deception, of creating chaos. But the damage was done. The quiet war had landed its first real blow, not on ships, but on belief. Trust, once the consul's greatest shield, had been pierced. And in the days that followed, something strange happened. One by one, species began pulling their support from the consul. They didn't announce it. They just stopped sending supplies, canceled meetings, or walked out of sessions. The consul grew silent, unsure of how to respond. For the first time in centuries, they faced something they could not control, a galaxy that no longer feared them. Elias didn't celebrate. He walked through the quiet corridors of his ship, thinking about every name, every colony, every worker who had suffered while the lie grew stronger. This wasn't victory. It was justice unfinished, but begun. He knew the consul would try to recover, to strike back in new ways. But now, the galaxy watched them with new eyes. And humanity, once the youngest voice in the council, had become its conscience. This was the human way of war without war. not because humans feared battle, but because they understood something deeper, that true power was not in destruction, but in the refusal to be broken. Their strength was in unity, in memory, and in truth. And as long as they held to that, no lie could stand forever. The stars, once distant and quiet observers of galactic politics, now seemed to shift their light with a quiet tension, as if they too sensed the change that was creeping across the galaxy. The turning point had come, not with fire, but with truth. Elias Vance had lit the spark, not by commanding fleets or calling for war, but by revealing what the consual had tried to bury. The false evidence, the manipulation of data, the betrayal of peace, it had all come to light, and now the old balance of power stood on trembling legs. What had once been a galaxy led by a trusted few was now unraveling, one alliance at a time. Species who had remained silent out of fear began to speak. Small voices, first ambassadors from lesser-known worlds, governors of outer rim stations, but soon, larger powers began to shift. Trade agreements were frozen. Embassies were quietly closed. Meetings that once included the consul were now held without them. Across the stars, a silent message echoed. The age of blind obedience was ending. Elias watched it unfold from the very heart of the human coalition's diplomatic vessel, the Resolute Light. It was still an unarmed ship, its shields weak and engines slow, but somehow it had become the center of galactic change. He no longer had to send messages begging to be heard. Now other leaders came to him, seeking advice, clarity, or simply a chance to be part of whatever new order was rising. Yet Elias remained calm, grounded, never letting the momentum become pride. He knew too well that the consual were not beaten. They were wounded, yes, but dangerous still, like an animal cornered in the dark. And cornered enemies always strike the hardest. Reports filtered in from the edge of known space. Consual vessels were seen moving without identifiers, entering systems without permission, and pressuring weak governments with threats cloaked in offers of protection. There were rumors of sabotage communications, blackouts, orbital stations, malfunctioning, cargo mysteriously vanishing. It was clear they were trying to hold on to power through fear where respect had failed. But humanity didn't fight them with bombs. Instead, they fought them with unity. For the first time, systems once divided by culture, species, or language now stood together under a simple banner not of war, but of truth. Elias called it the Alliance of Integrity, a temporary union where each member retained its own laws, but shared only one promise: they would no longer be ruled by lies. This new alliance spread faster than anyone expected. It wasn't because of power, but because of purpose. Each world that joined wasn't just gaining protection, they were becoming part of something greater. And the more systems that turned their stars away from the consual and toward the new alliance, the more the galaxy changed. The old lanes of power were shifting. The routes once guarded by consual fleets now lay empty, and the stars they had claimed for centuries were no longer safe for them to travel. Their control weakened not from invasion, but from rejection. Inside the halls of the consual high seat, there was panic. Their members argued behind closed doors, blaming each other for the failure. Some demanded a return to full military power, while others called for Elias to be arrested as a threat to peace. But outside those walls, no one was listening anymore. Their words, once law, now felt hollow. For too long, they'd ruled through fear and reputation. Now that reputation was broken. And in the vacuum left behind, humanity offered something new: honesty, shared purpose, and a willingness to admit mistakes. It was imperfect, but real. And in a galaxy tired of being manipulated, that was enough. Elias knew that something big was coming. The consual would not fade quietly. They still had fleets hidden in deep space, loyal officers, and systems too afraid to rebel. So he prepared, not for war, but for survival. He sent teams to protect communication relays, trained diplomats to counter consual lies, and created secure channels that couldn't be intercepted. The Resolute Light moved from system to system, not to conquer, but to connect. And everywhere it went, stars turned. Not physically, but in loyalty. It was a symbolic change, yet it held more weight than any battle could. The stars that had once shone for the consul were now lighting a new path. Then came the event that shook everything, a sudden consual operation on the border of the Lurian sector. They claimed it was a rescue mission, but independent reports said otherwise. Entire towns were shut down, people were taken without explanation, and all data from the region vanished. It was a bold move, designed to test how far the Alliance of Integrity would go without drawing weapons. Elias responded not with ships, but with visibility. He sent observers, public broadcasts, and messages across every channel. The consul tried to block the signals, but it was too late. The galaxy was watching now. The Lurian sector lit up with resistance, not violence, but refusal. Civil workers stopped following orders. Dock crews walked away from ships. Even consual soldiers began to question the commands given to them. It became clear the turning of the stars wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was a movement. Elias stood at the center, not as a ruler, but as a reminder that peace could be defended, not only by weapons, but by the courage to speak when silence was easier. And with each system that joined, the light grew stronger. The consul, once thought eternal, now looked like relics from a past no one wanted to return to. But Elias didn't let hope blind him. He knew the final act was still to come. Desperate powers always made desperate choices, and the consul had not yet revealed their last plan. The stars had turned, but the future was still fragile. One wrong move, one moment of weakness, and everything could fall. So he prepared, quietly, steadily. Because he believed in one simple truth, that once a star turns toward freedom, it never forgets the warmth. The galaxy had become a tense battlefield without guns. Ships still flew, trade still moved, and no war had been declared. But everyone could feel it, the pressure in the stars, the silence before a storm that never came, the waiting. The consul had lost their grip, but not their pride. And pride, Elias Vance knew, was the most dangerous weapon left. From the bridge of the Resolute Light, he watched news from across the galaxy come in consual fleets gathering near the neutral border, secret transmissions intercepted, diplomatic messages twisted into threats. Every day, something new tried to push the galaxy back toward fear. But Elias had one final move, a step he had been preparing for quietly, knowing that once it was made, there would be no going back. He wasn't a soldier, yet he understood this final confrontation wouldn't need guns. It would need one decision that left no room for misinterpretation. The goal was never destruction, it was clarity. And now, it was time to bring that clarity to the highest table in the galaxy. A council was called on the ancient station of Jaraxxus Prime, where peace treaties had once been written in fire and blood. The consul demanded a hearing, thinking they could still sway the remaining neutral worlds with performance and manipulation. Elias accepted without hesitation, even knowing it could be a trap. His own advisors warned him, what if it was a trick, a setup to disgrace or detain him? But Elias smiled. If they try to silence truth in front of everyone, he said, then they'll prove everything we've said. That one sentence silenced the room, not with fear, but understanding. Everyone knew it now. This was the endgame. The chamber of Jaraxxus Prime was a giant hall of polished obsidian, lined with old flags and glowing records of the galaxy's long history. Elias entered calmly, without bodyguards, without armor, only his words. The consual leaders sat across the great hall, their faces sharp and confident, but Elias saw the cracks behind their eyes, panic hidden behind pride. One of them stood, voice strong, accusing humanity of rebellion, lies, and destabilization. Another followed, blaming Elias for fracturing trust and poisoning the future. They tried to build their case as they always had, loud, dramatic, full of half-truths and old fears. The audience, filled with leaders from hundreds of systems, watched silently. And when the consul finished, the chamber turned to Elias. He did not shout. He did not wave his arms or list facts in endless lines. Instead, he walked to the center of the floor, placed a small device down, and activated it. The hologram flickered to life, real-time footage from across the galaxy, consual ships, blocking food routes, hidden prisons exposed by whistleblowers, intercepted messages of blackmail, forced silence, and corruption. And then, Without pause, Elias pressed another button: statements from former consual officers who had defected, from citizens who had suffered in silence, from entire planetary governments who finally spoke. He said only a few words. This is not opinion. This is not rebellion. This is what the galaxy has lived with while being told it was peace. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. The consul tried to object, but the crowd was no longer with them. Whispers spread. Messages were sent. In that one quiet moment, the stars turned again, not just in direction, but in final decision. And Elias knew he had done what war could never do. He had made the truth louder than fear. But it was not over. As he exited the chamber, a message reached him, urgent, encoded from a trusted source. The consul had one last plan, hidden and desperate. They intended to detonate a silent bomb near the orbital council ring of Juraxis Prime, framing a breakaway human world to create outrage and force a return to consual rule. It was madness, but madness born from fear. Elias had minutes, maybe less. He moved quickly, contacted the neutral station security, ordered full lockdown of the orbital ring, and broadcasted a clear message across all frequencies. If you act now, you are part of peace. If you hide, you become part of their silence. It was not a command, it was a choice. And to his surprise, thousands responded. Consual soldiers who were stationed at the ring dropped their weapons. Station guards disarmed the explosive. Even one of the consual engineers confessed on the spot. The final attempt to turn the galaxy against humanity had failed, not because of force, but because the galaxy no longer wanted to be ruled by fear. The consual were arrested, not by human hands, but by a united council vote. Trials would follow, and justice would take time, but the shift was complete. Power had changed, not in a bang, but in a steady rise of voices once silenced. Later, standing alone in the observation deck of the Resolute Light, Elias looked at the stars now, calm, steady, and open. He knew he would not remain a diplomat forever. Others would take his place, continue the work, improve the systems, and guide the new alliance. But he had done what he came to do. He had answered fury with reason. He had broken silence with truth. And he had made his final move, not with violence, but with the unshakable strength of a voice that refused to bow. And as the stars shone quietly over the recovering galaxy, the message was clear. Peace had not been saved by war. It had been saved by the will to face the storm without becoming it.